Now, Mike was suggesting that our lovely little Roadster engine could do with a bit of a freshen up. I've done some checking. First of all, the ignition system works a treat. We've got loads of lovely spark, and all the HC leads seem to be working nicely. There's also fuel definitely going into the engine. Now, I've had a listen to all of the injectors, and I'm pretty sure I can hear them all buzzing away nicely, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they actually are working properly, because we replace every 100,000 miles. It is essential maintenance, and will only set you back around $300. But a stretched chain and broken guides can cause catastrophic engine damage. But what's interesting is it does look like it actually is quite new. It's in quite good condition, as are the rails here, the guide rails. So what I want to do quickly now is actually spin the crankshaft around. Actually, straight away, you can see these little tiny circlips on the end of these two links here, and that's because this chain has actually been changed sometime in the past, which is good news. Somebody's looking after the car. Unfortunately, we don't know when exactly, so it's still prudent to actually change both the timing chain and all of the guides, just so we know exactly where we are. So the next thing we need to do is crank the engine around again. And there's a pin on the crankshaft. What I want to do is try and rotate the crank until the pulley actually shows 0 at that pointer. Into top dead center, so there's 20, 10, 0. So now it's all lined up. Next thing I can do is start taking things apart. I'm just loosening off the timing chain tensioner. That way I get a bit of slack, so I can then remove both sprockets here, because that gives me access to these plastic guide rails here. So of course what I've done there is actually put on some marks both onto the chain and onto the sprockets, so I get them all back in the same positions. If you don't get them back into the same position, the valve timing will be off, and the valves could hit the top of the piston. Not good. Now that the sprockets are off, I'll be able to properly swap the guide rails. To do that, I'll use this special factory tool to remove the pins that are holding our guide rails in place. Okay, so now for the new one. So I'm going to try and fiddle it back into position. Right, so we've now got all of the guide rails in place, which is great. So now what I'm going to do is put the sprocket back in position again, marking up my little white marks to make sure that everything is in the right position. So I can now put on the brand new tensioner. It's very important, of course. And I'm just putting this tensioner not all the way in, just to give it a bit of tension, but I want to get a little bit of slack as well, get some movement, because the next stage, I'm actually going to spin the engine around again to try and find those magical little links. There they are, moving to about there is perfect. Again, another factory tool, very handy. It's going to sit like so. Right, so now what this tool does is it actually keeps the timing chain on top of this sprocket, and that way I can keep winding it around, and that way obviously nothing is actually going to go horribly wrong. Top tip: place a rag in the chain galley to prevent the possibility of the circuit falling into the engine. That would be a nightmare. So now we have our brand new timing chain. Now it's quite clever how we put this on. We're actually going to, having broken the original chain, we then attach this to the tail end of the old chain. We're going to crank the engine over, drag the new chain through all the way around, and then connect it at the end. And so the first thing I have to do is connect these two chains together. So just put in a little pin in there, pop on that link, and then a little retaining clip. Now the reason we've gone for this clever little tool here, when I crank the engine around, there's every chance it could just jump off this sprocket. Of course, that would mean you'd lose all your timing marks. It could be disastrous. Right, so we've now got all the old chain from this link all the way down. So what I have to do is now disconnect it, put them together, reconnect it, and then we're done. Getting close to top dead center. All of our timing marks do still line up, which is fantastic. So we have successfully changed a timing chain. Awesome. Changing the timing